click the record button. Okay, she's definitely recording.
Oh, says I can leave the meeting.
No, you can't leave the meeting now. So Jim is going to take us through his presentation with slides, but he's more than happy for anybody to stop and ask questions at any point in time. So do you want to say a few words, Paul?
Yeah, I'll say a few words. I've got, you've said a lot of it, but 30 years experience in brand and strategic, Jim, I'm saying, not me, but I've also got the same, but 30 years of experience in brand and strategic design. Jim has worked across many industry sectors, so global, automotive, consumer services, obviously retail and leisure. In 2020, he is renowned for repositioning and rebranding of Sainsbury's and development of the new proposition and badge design for my beloved Arsenal FC. So he has leveraged his extensive experience managing international brands and focuses on bringing clarity into a strategic framework and processes required to affect change in organization. So before joining, Jim specialized in major brand identity programs, rebranding projects in Europe with Mitsubishi, a regular speaker at conferences, and a major contributor to periodicals. Jim is president of the Design Business Association and a fellow of RSA. Jim continues to be an advocate of UK design industry, focusing on effectiveness of design in society. So he currently splits his time between running his busy brand experience agency, dealing with entrepreneurs and city councils, big retail and sports brands, as well as startups and new ventures. And I know we're going to see a few of those today. So I know today he's going to set a bit of context to start off with how we've got here. And then he's going to discuss how the changes in consumer trends are affecting retail design. So Jim, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Paul. That was quite entertaining having it read to me. Never sure. It's great. Hi guys. I've got a little deck. It's always useful to have some pictures when you're a designer, isn't it? To follow, to share with people. I guess I will put this up. My caveat, I suppose, is these are obviously my views of the world from very much from a design perspective. So some of the things, I'm sure there'll be questions and debates around some of the topics I did, but I think it was quite an interesting topic that Paul threw my way to talk to you guys about today. I suppose I should start with a little bit about us. It's always good to tell you who we are. 2020 are 33 years old now as a company, so we've been through the mill, if you like. We used to be purely a retail design consultancy, but obviously we've evolved and changed over time, and we describe ourselves as an experience consultancy. In principle, we still work with people in places, but it's just a lot broader where those places are and the way those consumers and people interact with you as a brand. So we're very much that kind of that physical face-to-face experience business that we've kept as our raison d'etre, if you like. What we have honed over the years is a specialism in human behaviors and really understanding what makes people tick and how we can help clients translate that into physical and digital experiences. And because we've come out of a retail background, we're very commercially focused. So most of what we try and do is achieving some kind of positive result or social engagement today. So the measurements have changed, but the principle is still there. And I suppose the final thing for us is we are change people. We like to help people change. We've developed quite a clear vision of how important it is to adapt the way business works to make sure that people are getting who you are and what you do. And today it's all about playing and buying and working and getting involved in a much broader way. So we really are there to help businesses connect with their consumers better and get more engaged with them. This film just flicks a few things over the years of various things Paul mentioned about working with the big and the small of this world and getting into virtual experiences. Paul threw me a list of questions that I was a bit like, well, how on earth do you answer all of those? What came first, the new consumer or the new technology? I guess we'll get around to, I don't think there's an answer to that, but the chicken and egg scenario works in that one. How important is physical retail space for the future of retail? We'll look at that. Is experiential retail commercially viable? We'll also slightly look at that. How we measure success, definitely that's changed. Our pop-up stores are fad, here to stay. And then to look at, we've got some quite exciting and interesting things that hopefully you won't have seen all of them before as we go along. And I thought when I was talking to Paul about this, that the best thing to do was to go back 25 years and kind of do a little bit, remind ourselves, if you like, of a history, a retail history lesson. Back in 1995. I mean, I joined 2020 in 1996, so this is completely right for me, if you like. I landed in the middle of the 90s. I don't think we talked about baby boomers and Gen X's at that point, but they very much ruled the roost, and they were, of course, giving birth to those dreaded millennials of anyone under 40 will be, or pretty much at the moment. So they were, we were in that world in 95, and our high streets were buzzing, thriving, bustling. We'd come out of various recessions, but the market was all about retail. But at the same time, this was the year, if you like, Microsoft launched Windows 95, Amazon launched, eBay launched, Yahoo and Internet Explorer all happened in 95. Java was created, which meant you could put moving animation on websites, which completely changed the way that worked. And then in the next few years, we had Google come through, and then Napster in its kind of affecting music and everything else. So it was quite a big year 25 years ago. And I think you look at this and begin to realize what some of the triggers that were affected where we are today. This is a quick portfolio of 2020's projects in the 90s that I joined. And I have to look back at this and go, the budgets were big, the ambition was high, and the retail clients were very future focused, lots of new conceptual work. We opened the first Virgin megastores across the country, but particularly the ones on Oxford Street. Back then, big, hyper experiential retail experiences over 4 floors. We did the Cambridge BHS, which changed the way BHS operated in many, many ways when it was owned by Storehouse back then. Even Boots, I mean, that is a pharmacy that you probably would see elements of that still existing in their chain, but they were really big on design back in the 90s and trying to change the way they operated. Woolies were doing well. They were launching catalogs and doing all sorts of things. And out of town, Mothercare World, big investment in edge of town, out of town retail. So fantastic projects, and design was key to many of these businesses, and this is where they spent their money. And partly that was because that was where people went, because this was the internet in 1995, which is quite amusing. On the right is Amazon's website. You know, you can buy your 1 million titles and eyes for editors. You've got eBay in the middle. Somebody's just sold something for $700. Search engines were Yahoo, Jeeves, and Napster was coming along. That was how you sourced your music to play it on your computer. So, you know, this is 25 years ago, and you think, wow, that's in some ways retail hasn't changed much. The internet certainly has affected it. And of course, when you used the internet, if you were lucky, you were on the right-hand side and you had a nice little blue iMac at home, and you could slowly watch the wheel spin as you loaded your websites. And if you were the other scale, you were in an internet cafe trying to type and log in as best you could for an hour in a very undesigned cafe. And I thought, context to that, you know, it was a different world. And I guess those things are really affected where we are, because what happened in the 90s and the turn of the millennium was our high streets continued to boom, supermarkets land grabbed, all of our out of town retailing thrived, and shopping centres designed new concepts. I mean, I remember Blue Water opening. It was my near shopping centre. It changed the way we went shopping. It was fantastic back then to be able to go and actually spend a time in a retail mall that you could eat in. But of course, over the next few years, the high streets, you know, all succeeded and became quite generic and ubiquitous. The supermarkets ultimately ended up with way too much space. They're dealing with that, have been dealing with that for a while. Out of town retailing still goes, but it's so much better served online most of the time. And our shopping centres, most of them, unless they're in the really good spots, are struggling for footfall. So it's a very interesting sort of 25 years. And then all the time, internet's growing, Amazon's diversifying, and all of those millennials are growing up into adults and internet and evangelists. What you will remember, those of you can, is the noughties, I guess, the beginning and so brought all the world of the big brand flagships, where design mattered most. And if you were lucky enough to get to work for one of these guys, you were kind of doing some of the most interesting work in the market. And the retailers were all grappling with lots of other things and fulfilling orders and looking at websites. The budgets began to shift a little bit, but these brands were taking back control, I guess, and showing the way and managing their product experience. And what they did was start to set new standards in their own stores that set rules for retailers, but then also became the influence for many retailers to try and copy. How many times have we been asked to copy what Apple do over the years? You could write in a Bible. It's or Nike Town Experiential. They're still there influencing work, and thank God, because this was a kind of a transformation, if you like, into a slightly different area. What also happened in contrast to the brands was department stores had a real new lease of life. In certainly many of them became brands in their own right, particularly Selfridges, Liberty. Back then, this was when we designed Liberty Regent Street, which is currently where COS is, but we had all three. They had all 3 floors before they sold it back to Crown Estates. And this was a fantastic experience of defining and curating the brands that they held, but making them part of Liberty's experience rather than shop in shops, if you like, and brand things. And it was a benchmark. And I know, you know, Selfridges have continued to do that. And in many ways, Liberties have continued to do this. So they became real emporiums, and it was an exciting time. The other triggers that I guess came out were mobile. Mobile was massive. By 2002, 75% of us had phones, which was a big switch off. All these stores, previously everyone had been trying to sell phones, suddenly they were about relationships. And all of that brought with it was data tracking, beginning to be able to see who was doing what, where they were, when they were using your phone. And we designed a lot of work with Orange at the time, who came through this and invested in retail. And it was all driven back then around getting people engaged with the service rather than with necessarily buying the product, and getting and longevity and keeping people retained, if you like. And therefore you were making the shopping experience easier for them to then serve people. And actually what we learned even back then was if you got people to personalize an SMS message on their answer machine, they were 50% more time likely to leave a message, and therefore Orange benefited from more calls and return calls and everything else. And all these things have played out as we've gone along using technology in the future. Just to kind of benchmark what was happening whilst all that retail was going on, was Amazon launched. And I guess this was from a retailer's view, they launched in 95, selling books, predominantly killed that industry for a while. It has come back, but they certainly decimated it, but really early on. They then moved into CDs and DVDs, changed the whole retail music industry. They then launched Kindle, which ultimately changed the way books were published. Prime came along and set us all new delivery expectations. Amazon Unboxed became, the service that Blockbuster hated, because it suddenly meant you could get your video delivered, and that led to Prime subscriptions, and then where we are today, they've changed Hollywood and the way we view home. So lots of big impacts, and of course all this time they were collecting our data. They were setting up ecosystems that they could manage, and they also are setting up, they control half the internet with their service providing. But they're doing smart speakers now. They've got AI, space travel. Who knows what's next with Amazon? One of the thing I guess that they've had the most impact on retail for is this, obviously, this unrelenting push for faster shipping and convenience through formats, and they just keep changing the landscape. And it's very hard for people to keep up or differentiate or have a reason for being. And I guess that's one of the challenges we know and we've seen. I think it's settled a little bit, but you can't underestimate Amazon and where it's going with things. But what they have done is changed things. So I guess change is never a bad thing. It's never, it's never the worst place to be if you've got to change and get better. But it has had a big impact. Yeah.
Jim, can I just jump in just with a comment really, rather than a question? Which it is fascinating, and what I think is fascinating is we think 25 years later that we own, in terms of retail, that we're owning the experiential space, when really it's been around for 25 years. Well, it's been around for longer, but in terms of retail, the brand flagships, all that, Nike Town and all the stuff, the Virgin mega stores, actually, it's almost as if it's full circle, which I find fascinating. It is amazing that we've almost come full circle, and obviously now you've clearly got data and digital that
yes.
You're into that. But that's only part, that only drives the experience. That's all that does. It just adds to the sensory experience.
It has come full circle, and the big challenge in one of your questions is how do you make your money today? Because of course back then the money was made in shops. We all went to the stores, we all bought our products, and the idea was you got them to put more products in their bag, and therefore you increased your sales, if you like, and sales per square foot. All those measurements were really key to those guys. And of course, when suddenly you go, well, 2.5% of my sales are online, 5% of my sales are online, 15% of my sales are online, 20% of my sales are online now, and I've still got 400 stores. That's 20% less business in your stores. You don't make it up, and then that basically meant that the retail model doesn't work the way it did. Even though the aspiration for experiential is still the same, it's very hard to make it pay for itself. That's the challenge without new thinking, and I think that's where it's coming through, if you like. But you're right, it has gone full circle in terms of experience. I just popped this slide in. We use this quite a bit, actually. There's this thing of the difference in people, because it's our internet generation, if you like, and now the much more, the kind of digital generation, and without even looking at Generation Alpha, the new ones coming through, have set different standards in the expectations and the way they operate and the way they think and what they expect. And of course, it's very hard for retail and people who are involved in it to, when the people who are spending the money tend to be older because they're the ones with the cash, to actually start to change things to the way the people are going to come through are going to think and do. And I don't think we'd seen such a change in the way people behaved as we have with the internet generations, if you like. That was the big difference. It was quite easy, people shopping. It evolved, and this cataclysmic change in mindset means that your retail is quite a different ballgame today, because people actively look for things in different ways and search out and research and do things so differently to the way it used to be. And that's been a big shift, and it doesn't get any easier. The Gen Z guys are totally unforgiving. They'll elect a president, but they'll also destroy a brand in seconds just because they diss them on a social media platform. And the millennials have all sorts of other kind of facets that make them want to behave in certain ways. So it's quite a challenge. And I guess for retailers, by the end of the noughties or the end of the 2010s, we're really in this world of knowing they had to change, and the dilemma was how and how much do we spend and where do we spend our money. And of course, what you can see is some great success stories over that time. I'm not looking at the ones that didn't succeed necessarily, but Next came from a catalog business, completely tackled the internet, understood how the two worked. They built a platform that worked, that incorporated other brands. They expanded their range rather than contracted or anything else, and continue to grow in retail. And likewise, Waitrose, knew their shopper. They were totally consumer obsessed and have stayed that way. Now they've been through some ups and downs, but in a way, they then never got into playing the game so much as, are we competing with Sainsbury's, or are we competing with Aldi, or who are we here with? They kind of kept core to that. I love the idea of Primark. I mean, they just never went online. The queues outside Primark as soon as COVID was over were ridiculous, weren't they? And you kind of go, well, are they all queuing for Catwoman? And of course, no one had been able to buy any of their product, and they'd stayed loyal. It was really interesting. So they just stayed the same. And then you get amazing brands like Burberry, who just have embraced social. They embrace, a luxury product, but they've kind of really grabbed that whole understanding of consumer and the way they behave. And so there are a lot of old traditional businesses that were in that 90s world, if you like, who bounced through this and have come out well at the other end, and will continue to evolve, who knows, until the next hiccup. But I guess there were, if you skip 10 years, and I'm not going to go through the tens, if you like, because ultimately, even from our business perspective, was interesting. We started working with leisure businesses and entertainment businesses and cinemas and football clubs, because retail was struggling to innovate in its physical form, and all the kind of money it was work. We did lots of work internationally, but in the UK it was a tough 10 years for retail. I think in 2010 to 2020 it was a difficult time, and people were all fighting for space and differentiation, and most of the money spent went into digital, and ultimately, many failed because they had too much space, continued that way. Lots of them left it too late to change. We did a fantastic piece of work with Maplin, and we would have all thought with their management team that we had it made up, but they got caught out by debtors and not being given credit, and suddenly Maplin lost the battle, in 2018, I think it was, which was incredibly sad. But and many of them were also seen off by Amazon, but no one was anticipating or expecting COVID to come along. So of course, if you were vulnerable in 2019, when 2020 hit, we very sadly lost, a lot of business. And some of these might bounce back into our worlds through other means. But if you look at the administrators list, it's quite a sad list of our high streets. And you can see just by looking at these, whatever is 49 brands, why there's lots of empty space in the high streets of the UK at the moment. And some really big names and some really people you wouldn't really have thought, and lots of reasons for these, but in general, they're all wrapped up in a bad year in a way. So let's look forward, maybe, and that's the nicest thing to do. I think I found this quote. I would have loved to said I wrote it, but the pandemic didn't kill retail; it changed what works, which I think is perfect actually for the summary of this. Because it's a different world we're coming out into right now, and I think to succeed, there are quite different models, and we alone have started looking at what that means and how that means. I think there are three things that we believe the future retail is about. One is you have to be connected. It's almost you have to be digitally first. I mean, not everyone, but unless you're an independent startup, very particular, you have to be digitally connected. You have to have a kind of seamless experience, whether that's online, offline, social, whatever the journey, it has to be, you know, kind of wrapped up. If you're going to have retail, it might be a convenience experience. It might be a really high experiential thing, but you have to have a very defined experience, exciting, dynamic, visceral, that blends physical, sensorial, digital content to build real powerful bonds between consumers. And if it's not that, then it's going to look a bit lax on the high streets. And ultimately, we all believe that kind of guess you've got to create a community, and beyond the purchase of this, we need really powerful centers to build relationships with, and bringing people together to play and shop and eat and use social media, and I increasing that the long time value of their lifetime value of each of these experiences. So we use this today to kind of help brands understand where they're going. Sorry, I've just flipped that over. And we've rewritten our sort of design mantra and what that means, if that means anything. Paul, you mentioned it's gone full circle. It's kind of gone full circle. Yeah. It's mediocrity is no longer acceptable. I think to succeed in retail, you have to deliver the best experience possible, either ultra conveniently or hyper experiential. Definitely the old measures are defunct. What we used to do is all that average transaction value, sales per square foot, basket size. They're all now replaced by, data collection, brand reach. Is it, have I got the right brand engagement? Am I socially relevant? Footfall has remained, because of course, if you can't get people to come to your place, then you've got a problem. But if they're not buying there, how are you making any money out of them? And that's, I think, why these other things become really important, because what we all want is footfall, but actually, if you're walking away going, oh, I'll buy that later online, oh, that was really interesting, I'll order them now and I'll pay for it later, they become real challenges for the old model of retail. So these measurements have to start to, I guess, get embedded into the way people think. What we know is design is special. I think it adds value, and therefore I think we spent a long time a bit on the back foot, and design was felt to be maybe just something, the lipstick, if you like, and the prettying up of a space, but actually it's the thinking behind how a space operates. So it's up to us to create these kind of really immersive experiences. We don't do anything now without technology, I guess, within an experience. What we know, and I know Paul's an advocate of this, is you make the low value stuff really easy. Don't use technology for its bling. Always, it just costs you money, but actually it's the stuff you can do to make life easier for customers so they have more time to play and engage with you as an experience. That experience might be through technology, but actually give them time to do it. So make transaction easy, do it cashless, do it, whatever way you can do that. Product information, get it into something that's really easy to update and change, so you don't have so much work done by people in store to update those things. One hasn't gone away is consumer obsession. You have to know your people, you have to know who you're targeting, what they are, who they are, what they're doing, and be honest, real, aware, and ultimately responsible for that. Content, gold dust. It's if you start a brand today, you start with content, you start with a story, you start with relevance. The challenge for so many retailers is that content doesn't really exist. We've never created it. We don't have it. So you've got a backlog, and that's a challenge. How much do I have to spend to get content that I can use in all these channels and in these different places? So it's quite a tough one, the content, but it's a really important element. We have to be sustainable, ethical, considerate in whatever we do or use. All of us have to do that today. And I guess the funny one from all perspectives is the realization that money is quite valuable, that we spend it wisely. I think some of that stuff we did in the 90s was quite frivolous, and you wouldn't do it today because you wouldn't get necessarily a return on it through actual experience. So we're much more careful. We're spending the money where it needs to be spent, and also not to be greedy, any of us really. I mean, I guess that's the thing, is don't expect loads, because you'll be rewarded, but it's a tough one.
Things on that, which I think, just to, again, we're totally aligned on, just to sort of, I definitely agree on your comment on data, because simply because you can measure it doesn't actually mean that you should now, you know. And one of the things that I've seen recently, and something I wrote about the other day, is these extra things that now that you can find out through data are things like, you know, what communities do they come from, and you can and what are the sentiments towards the brands. All this stuff is actually, you can find it out through data. So that was definitely one thing. The other thing, again, it was a slide that when you were talking about Next and Primark and Burberry, I think it's so, one of the things that's so, I remember Doug Stevens saying as well, that what you do is you pick your niche, and you just go deep.
Yes.
Deep. So like, yeah, obviously, you know, Primark is, you know, pilot high, sell it cheap, but with obviously lovely, really good environments. But that's one of the things I think some of those players.
Yeah. I mean, but Primark, even they go deep. They just go deep on cheap.
Yeah.
If you like, and you know, and what's quite interesting with Primark is, of course, they seem to have survived the environmental backlash that you would have thought, you know, disposable clothing and all of those things would have had more of an effect and impact on their business, but it hasn't, and maybe one day that will have, because they're not doing an awful lot.
Yeah,
if you like, to compete with that, but it's
no, it may capture. And my last point was, which again, it's another one that that we interviewed Doug Stevens, that he went on about, and I know it's not just him, is that the store is now almost like a 24 set, or however long it's open, it's the brand as a billboard. You know, it's a big time touch point and advert as well. Which,
yes,
you know, that again, people that retailers have been so successful use it as a billboard and use it as a almost touch point.
I think I think that's true, and that people, where and how is that billboard working? And I think that one of the things comes up in an example in a minute, but is the idea around, if you want footfall in your store, or your however many stores we have, then one of the things you could also do is broadcast that store to a much broader audience through social media platforms, everything else. And of course, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. You know, if you want to monetize a retail space, then actually you need to take that retail space out to a broader audience and use it as a platform to talk, if you like. And I think that's quite an interesting area that we're beginning to see explored, because ultimately you can get, social media touches millions of people, if you like, but you'll only ever get, you know, 5,000 a day in a store. And that, if you can play with those sort of data analytics and things, and start to play with those sorts of stories, then it becomes quite an interesting thing you can develop. I've thrown in lots of examples of things that are happening right now that I think are quite exciting and quite interesting, and make me, hopefully us, feel good about the world of retail and what's going on in it. Having looked at all the story and the bad stuff, there's some amazing things happening in the retail world right now. They're going to take time to bed in. They're going to take time to impact fully. We have just completed a mad new brand launch, designed the store for a guy he was the ex-CEO of Grey's Nuts, if you like, the people who did that. He's got this passion for doing healthy things, and has took one of the most unhealthy products and invented a not bad for you donut. What a great idea. It's low in fat, it's low in sugars, it's got low in calories, but it's still indulgent and full of all the yumminess that you would expect from a donut.
Where is this, Jim?
This is the first one's in Brighton. This opened 2 or 3 weeks ago in the lanes, in the North Lanes in Brighton.
Amazing.
You know, it's got, you know, you're designing things today in full Instagram mindset, so you can sit in the seat, post it. All these people are coming in and sharing it with their friends, and he's done nothing on marketing at all in this space. Just used Instagram as the model to get this out, and it's got people coming from London to go and have a look at this store as consumers, not as people going to have a look. So it's been a fantastic thing. We're looking at another one in Croydon Box Park at the moment, and then his plan is to test and learn, and if his first few stores are successful, then on we go. For us, it's been a really interesting journey working with it, because ultimately we've got as part of our fee shares in his business that made us more affordable to him, and we get a kickback if it's successful. So these things are all going to become the way of the norm going forward, I guess, and that's partly the fun of it right now in terms of what's happening. Lots of new things will be seen. This isn't one of ours, but this is an amazing story, an American that Paul knows really well as well. But Warby Parker are like an opticians. I think the story goes that they were pure play, and people kept knocking in their offices doors to come and try things on, or to have a look at the glasses. And eventually they went and decided to open some stores. So they used design incredibly well. I mean, these stores are beautiful, and they've used a mix of art and design and these amazing backdrops in every store, and they're popping up all over the world. I think that one in the top left is actually in India right now. So he's a small New York glasses chain suddenly embracing retail.
One of the really interesting things about Warby Parker is they started off as a pure play. Every time they open a store, they only open a store based on data. So actually, yes, they're in Soho, in New York, and they're in some of the Fifth Avenue, et cetera, but they're in these really where they're pockets of, initially, they're local as well. They're in these really strange areas, and the reason is because they use their customer data to make the decision where they open the store. So it's very interesting. They're opening their 200th store, and I think they've had to obviously they've had to stop it for a year, but they're on they're opening over the world now.
It's happening on our doorstep here. It's kind of interesting. Young brands taking space. I mean, this is just fantastic. This store, it's in Covent Garden on Neal Street, worth a visit. No Chaos are a skateboard brand. Grungy skateboards as they used to be, no more. Funky, amazing Covent Garden stores full of merchandise and apparel and experience, and they've got a sort of sub brand or a partner brand called Scum, who are all about interactive and experiential, and they've got the basement, so you basically go downstairs into the basement party and book a space on the track, and you can skateboard, and using Covent Garden space like it's never been used before, but in a way. And this is the growth of the millennial, if you like, or the Gen Z guys coming through and saying we can do retail. Fantastic piece of retailing. Love to have been involved in that one, but they did it themselves, which is great. You may know Showfields have been around a little bit for a couple of years, but in America, we just love Showfields. I mean, they are the new department store, the ultimate curator, if you like, of everything mad, like unconventional brands and artists and communities. It's like liberties of the 21st century, but with a really weird twist, because they use this kind of crazy surreal design in everything they do, and create these room sets, and their stores are hyper experiential. and fantastic. You could, do, bars and coffee bars and nail bars and all mixed up, in gin bars, all in retail, and a real inspiration, worth a look at, because it just changes the way you see a store and the loyalty you get from people who love it.
In one of their stores, they've got it's 4 floors, and they've got a slide, a huge slide, where you slide from the 4th floor to the ground floor, like a huge orange slide. It's just mad.
Yeah, of course, I forgot to mention, it's all built on, independent brands. So these are all not, they're not their products they're selling here. They're all, they're empowering online brands to have showrooms, new startups, everything else. So it's kind of really interesting. It's like, it's a proper marketplace, but a controlled one. And on that note, I guess that, Paul and I and Jane and a guy, Richard Benson, have been working on a new phygital retail concept that we just thought we'd play to people, because it's very exciting time, if you like, on developing a completely a space filler concept, if you like, where we're aiming to take empty space and create new retail destinations that are built around independent brands and pure players, and create a controlled, curated environment that brings these people to play, that we could put into, a fantastic city, with an empty Debenhams on the ground floor, and do something really innovative in that area, and combine it with food and excitement and interest. So this hasn't reached the ground yet. We're hopefully close, but this is a kind of really interesting, exciting new world, if you like, that comes out of the demise of many a great retailer. I just thought I'd show an ultra convenience, because in the really formulaic end of this, we did this work during COVID. It opened in May this year, on the Austrian Post Office, which was a completely 24/7 branch that also operated during the day. So rather than it being self-serve only, it was a self-serve and serve branch. But because it was this, we got such great technology for the self-serve, we were able to change the model of the people working there, so they became ambassadors and service-based people rather than servicing the client's needs. So you no longer have queues in a post office as you would have. We haven't sold it to the UK post office yet, but it's, only a matter of time. But it's a fantastic. But ultimately, even though it's a technically driven self-service space, we've created a really warm, quite human experience, where there's space to sit, talk, and communicate, and have a meeting and do things. So it's not all driven around tech. It's all driven around human interaction with tech, and I think that's kind of made it really quite exciting and quite interesting. So there was a big question on pop-up. I think pop-up has been around for a long time, and is going to be around for a long time. I think the difference today is, I think pop-up becomes a real test bed for brands, and a real place to experiment and try whether that's a brand who just wants to try out retail because they've been online only, or whether that's actually brands who've got a really strong offer and they want to test it with consumers. I mean, Converse is the one on the left, who did their Renew thing in Cold Drops Yard just before COVID, actually. But it was a fantastic experience, very, very tactile, no technology involved. It was all about remaking, re-educating people to upcycle, personalize, do things. I mean, what a great thing of interaction and getting your community to kind of gather and to work and advocate your brand. It was a really exciting one. And then on the other side, Hot Second was all about testing technology. These guys had this amazing bit of tech that basically dresses you. It's like a magic mirror, but slightly more surreal than that. So that it was a short-lived thing where people came along and recycled their clothes, and on the payback was you could get a digital outfit pasted onto your body, and then you could share that on social media. But you bartered with your clothing first, but then you got the fun of doing this, and you could customize it and do things. And then they also had customization stations in as well. So lots of this reuse and recycle. But I mean, a fantastic idea, and I think we'll see lots more of these things happening. And they're quick, easy things to do in many ways if you work hard. But they bring real value because you can learn. This technology, if you're going to sell it to a retailer to put in their store, you're going to have to have proven people are interested and engaged in it. That's kind of the reality of it. Or and Converse want to evolve, so they're doing all these things to try to test and learn as they go along.
Jim, can I just ask you about magic mirrors? Do you think that, I mean, they've been around in various forms for quite some time, but do you think they'll ever get to the stage where they form a real part of the offer, that they can be made?
I don't know. It's a really difficult one, isn't it? So if you had a shop and you were going to the trouble to have a retail store, you're not necessarily going to sell from it, everything from it. But if you went in there with your mates to try on frocks or whatever it was, surely you'd want to try on the frocks. I mean, I think the challenge for me is the magic mirror is a gimmick of saying, well, actually, you don't need to try lots of things on, because you can just press a button and it will automatically do that. And why do I go to a store to do that? I could do that at home. So I think if you said you could get that technology into everyone's homes who wanted it, that might be a really cool way, because that becomes part and parcel of the way that the internet will work, and it quite possibly will. So smart TVs, you can suddenly get your TV, you can stand in front of it. Your TV has a camera in it, embeds your image on it, and you could shop on outfits. That's brilliant, isn't it? That's a magic mirror through your TV, and that's really useful at home. But I think if you go to a store, you want to touch and feel and try the sizes on. We have the same in automotive. You don't want to put all the cars in the showroom because it just fills up the showroom. You're right, but then you've got to have enough of the range to be able to try out. If you want to go and try a certain car out, you've got to go and see the car, haven't you? So you don't go and look at a different car. You want to see the car you want, type of thing. And I think some of those things become the reason you have retail. The gimmicks work the other way. Personally, that's the kind of way I see it.
Interesting.
This is really fun. I mean, this is about enjoying shopping, isn't it? This is dressing up in a mad thing. At that point, I think this is quite entertainment based rather than purchase based in a way, and I think there's quite a difference to that. But it's I'll probably eat my hat and find magic mirrors in the next
But I think it's interesting, like with technology, how it does start off possibly as gimmicky, because even looking at those 25 years ago, and you look at Ask Jeeves, or you look at Amazon on its million books and book titles, it does eventually embed itself in our culture, doesn't it? So
yes, it does. Yeah.
The magic mirror, it's not there yet. It still feels a bit. I agree. I agree with it. Still feels a bit gimmicky. But 3 to 5 years time, all of that stuff is we'll just expect it.
And
it will just be part of our journey.
Yes, and what AI does and all of those things will make a big difference to that. All the technology and where it's evolving and how intuitive it becomes has a big impact on what those things can then do. And that's what's so exciting about it. It's constantly there. But of course, if you're putting things in a store, you're investing in tech. And of course, at that point, the return on that investment becomes a really big decision, doesn't it? And that's always been, if I put up a big screen on the wall and suddenly the formatting's wrong, 3 years later, and I've got to replace it, that's a waste of money, isn't it? That's the challenge with digital in retail in many ways. Why having people's phones is so helpful. There are some really mad things coming through that are going to influence us, driven by our these new brands, new people out there discovering and doing things that are off my sort of understanding at times. I mean, that quote right in the middle is basic space. They're saying this space is not for everyone. This space is not mass produced, conventional, influenced. This space is personal, experimental, true, a place for unique products and experiences for individual shopping now, shaping tomorrow. If you want to buy stuff from Basic, you have to join and pay a membership to buy from them. It's kind of mad. This is like they're doing pop-ups, a fantastic online platform of both new and owned and brands, just a melee of products. It's just mad, and it's so well done. You're kind of going, wow, this is really engaging. It's really exciting, and but almost you have to be 25 to get it, and that's the kind of the interesting thing. But that, of course, is going to be what's coming our way and what's going to influence many other things, and why I love that skateboard shop. And then Pop Shop Live is, what do they described it as?
They described it as if QVC and Etsy had a baby.
Yeah, this will be it.
And it's bloody, it is mad, but you know what? They've just raised $100 million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, selling on e-commerce platforms, and yeah. I mean, it's just crazy.
No.
But fun, and you know, and using a way of communicating that's really vibrant and exciting and kind of out there, and combines physical with media and broadcast and social. So it's kind of a real mix of outputs, and if you like, blurred channels, shall we call them. We're flipping back to those brands. I mean, this is really interesting as well. I guess it's a full circle story, because back in the day of flagship stores, when people like Adidas and Nike were establishing their rules, the knock-on effect to that is now we did Adidas's store in JD, New Times Square in New York, and it was completely Adidas's space. So there you've gone back to this thing of, if you want Nike in there and you want Adidas in there, you give them the control of their environment and their consumer and the digital and everything else. So it was fantastic, because it was a great piece of creative work, and lots of digital integration of screens behind and mad things and fun and new furniture. But it was ultimately driven, that's just the brief from Adidas, but it's great that you see how brands have taken control of their experience, and today those retailers have to kind of play the game a little bit more, which isn't great for JD Sports. And just a couple to finish really this conversation. We talked about with our kind of world of the neighborhood, but this is what we have today is an awful lot of empty space in our high streets, and I guess landlords are very aware of that. City councils are very aware of that. Lots of new initiatives, lots of redevelopment things happening. We've got 2 or 3 briefs at the moment that are all coming from councils, if you like, around what to do with space and brand in space and things. And people, you know, these are 3 examples that have been around, if you like, of people who've already been in this game. But Box Park continue, you know, the brilliant idea of putting a container in and creating a whole experience. You know, we're going to see more of this, but also use of space. So Upmarket was an idea that happened between a peer here, who many of you will know, and Hammerson, around using communal spaces to drive footfall and drive retail. I'm sure this will start happening in dead spaces as well. And Market Hall is the food hall version of that, where they take old buildings, particularly in London, that are landmark buildings, and actually then get an agreement with the council to then go in and put in a full Markets Hall space food offer. So it becomes a destination in what was otherwise an unused space. So these things are fantastic opportunities. You'll see entrepreneurs and businesses and people beginning to go, what can I do that's less permanent? And I think that's a really interesting world, is this kind of idea that if you grow and you expand, you've got to be able to contract as quickly as you grow and expand today. And I think that's the thing. I think gone are the days where you'd want to have 500 stores for the next 10 years, because who knows? And I think that's why you'll see lots of this happening in a much more of a temporary pop-up-y type way in the future. And I'll just finish my little spiel and then we can talk. And with my quote that the pandemic didn't kill retail. This is the quote from the CEO of Nike at the beginning of this year. Now, obviously, their sales soared to 82% in online in the last in the last quarter of last year. But they're on track to be doing 50% of their sales online, which is kind of mad, isn't it? In various forms. So their online now is far more profitable than their wholesale channels of selling through resellers, so, and department stores and things. So you suddenly go, that continues to be the backdrop of this, is we will continue to increase our online purchasing. We will fulfillment gets faster and faster. You know, you can buy food. If you run out of milk, you can have it delivered in like in an hour or whatever. You don't even have to go to the corner shop. So this is, you know, some of that will be a blip, but other things will become everyday things. So I think the role of retail, making retail work, is going to be really exciting, but also really tough. And I guess that to make it profitable and affordable is going to be the biggest challenge in going forward, I think, from my perspective on this. And I'll stop and we can ask and you can talk and I'll jump out.
Fantastic.
Do we want to not stop sharing yet?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, there you go.
That was amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, the run through from reminding us where we were to where we are now, and you're so right about, you know, the 2-hour delivery. So I told you I'm in Pittsburgh, so I'm not in New York. I'm in Pittsburgh. You know, small city in America. They've got with Target this thing called Ship Shop, which I think is the most dreadful name I've ever heard. But literally, if it's like Amazon Prime, you pay $100 for the year, and anything is shipped within an hour. And you know, we do it the whole time. Literally, we say, "Oh my God, we need." Yesterday, I said we needed another oven glove. It was here almost before I'd finished ordering it. It was just unbelievable. And I suppose, whilst that is incredible, part of me thinks, how do the smaller boys compete with that? You know, how do some of these incredibly entrepreneurial, interesting, innovative businesses compete with Amazon and Target and the big boys when they can have the technology to do that?
But I think, well, there's definitely a hyper local thing going on as well, isn't there? So what you'll find is the national chain will probably diminish massively, and you'll get localized businesses that have localized, and at that point you can compete with that, because of course you're dealing with your connections, or you're dealing with your customers. I think that the challenge is you can't to an extent compete with those big boys. But of course, what they've then got to do is operate Target stores for enough people to make money out of their stores, because what they're doing. I mean, I did, the scenario for me is also the one when Tesco bought half of the, you know, every out of town, on the edge of every town in this country with a supermarket, and then they all went on a roll of opening up Tesco Express or Sainsbury's local. Of course, they localized their trade. So suddenly you could buy your products really conveniently down the road. You could have things ordered. They basically destroyed their out of town network of stores through their own growth pattern. And I think no one predicted that. I don't think. Maybe they did at the time, but I guess that's the similar thing, isn't it? If you over deliver on some of these things, you're actually destroying your bread and butter at the same time. And I guess that's the challenges with innovation, isn't it? Is what comes next.
One of the things I think was really interesting was your last slide, because again, I can't remember who was talking about it with one of the people we had on, but Nike reduced in 2017, they reduced their third-party wholesale partners from overnight from 60,000 or more, I think it was. I think it was about 160,000 to 60, of which obviously JD was one of the one. And the whole point about that the reason why they did that, absolutely, firstly, was exactly what you said, to take control of their brand. So, you know, they're not relying on JD, okay, but they're not relying on someone to put an Adidas and a Nike trainer next to each other in an awful environment. So that was one thing. But the other thing is the data. So you know, and that's the problem, that if you are basically, as Doug Stevens went on about, that the old industrial model of retail is dead. So basically, you know, when you take these brands that had 500 stores and they were housing different brands in there, that's why Nike doesn't do that anymore. They want the data that goes to, they want to know their customers. Whereas before, you know, they had all their data mixed between 150,000 third-party wholesalers. But what the direct-to-consumer model does is obviously they begin to understand who their clients are, which is why in 2020, obviously during lockdown, they grew, because they know who the hell their customers are and that they can market to. And it's a massive, you know, people thought they were mad to basically sack their, in fact, they came off Amazon, didn't they? They ditched Amazon, which everyone thought they were absolutely mad. So I think that was just absolutely fascinating. But one of the ways that you can take on Amazon, because it's very two-dimensional, Amazon, isn't it? Is, again, going back to the full circle, is outstanding customer service, real outstanding customer service. You know, you can't take that on, because people will pay a little bit more if you know they feel good when they're shopping and they're looked after and they're understood, their needs are understood. So that is one of the ways, again, if you know, it's one of the focuses of more niche players. And absolutely fascinating, Jim. That was amazing.
Brilliant. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody want to make any comment? Have any questions for Jim? Cool. My big takeout was flexibility from everything you said. It's about being nimble, isn't it? And when you design, presumably you're now designing with that in mind, that things can adapt and change and be flexible.
Adapt to change. And then also when you're because you're doing things maybe that won't last, we're definitely a lot more into using materials that aren't, you know, virgin materials almost. You know, recycling, reusing things that you can, repurposing things has become quite a big thing as well, because otherwise you end up also, I mean, there's some of that real investment in stores is you have to do a fair bit of work, but it's it's kind of amazing how different it is today, and what you fit out a store with. And how
I thought your last comment was just genius, which you're absolutely right. When you've got to be able to contract as much as you've got to be able to grow. I think that's such a brilliant thing to just keep in your mind when you're doing this stuff. So pop-up's an easy format to highlight, because you're not tied into a 10-year, 15-year contract. But all that, like materials you're using, the way you're designing furniture, you know, and you talked about in the 80s or in the 90s, you know, designing all those specific kind of like really like hyper, you know, those big hyper virgin mega stores and stuff.
That's huge.
But it was frivolous, wasn't it? It was frivolous.
It was frivolous, but they could afford to be, because of course you were building a store on Oxford Street. You could have 1 million people, well, however many millions. It was like a destination retail. It would pay for itself in 6 months, basically. That was the madness of it. Those days are long gone. You know, you've got to be careful what you're paying for, haven't you? Because it's nothing's free.
Some amazing takeaways in that. Amazing takeaways.
Cool.
Brilliant. Well, I certainly want to make sure that we put the whole recording up on the site so that people can access it, and we'll take some of your key sound bites, I think, and play them back, because I know there are lots of people that couldn't come today who would want to hear this.
Yeah, just so you know, Jim, I've got a huge amount of I've got so many emails that of people asking me to send them the recording.
Cool.
So many, because this is there's some key takeouts, and as I knew they would be, as we knew they would be.
Great, it's a pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Really nice to see you again. Hopefully,
and you
given all these new projects, we will be working together at some point.
Yes.
Good. So thank you very much, everybody. 17th of September, 17th? Yes, I think it's 17th of September is our next, event, when we'll be hearing from Meg Lussman, and she'll be talking about retail careers and how to make the most of them in the current climate in particular. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Jim. Thanks, everybody.
Welcome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Keep well. Safe journey home, Jane.
Thank you very much.